To you today from the campus of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And what you're seeing on the screen here is actually one of our weather stations. So we at the State Climate Office run a network of weather stations throughout the state, and there's a picture of one of them. It's in north central Nebraska, and as do many of the state climate offices run a state weather network. So again, thanks for joining today. Here's just some general information. If you've been on these webinars and you've seen this before, but just to cover some of this, so this is definitely a collaborative effort. There are many individuals and organizations that contribute to this webinar. So this activity is a collaboration between NOAA and National Centers for Environmental Information, and Doug in particular, the American Association of State Climatologists. Often you'll hear the webinar being presented by a state climatologist. The Midwestern and High Plains Regional Climate Center provide quite a bit of the information that you'll see here, and they also archive the webinars. A lot of the graphics come from NOAA's Climate Prediction Center, as well as the National Drought Mitigation Center. So these webinars are done every third Thursday of the month, and April 20th we'll have the next webinar that'll be done by Dr. Dennis Toddy. He's the director of the USDA Midwest Climate Hub. You can get access to future webinars and information on the drought.gov website that's listed here. And as I mentioned earlier, the past recorded presentations can be found on both the Midwestern and High Plains Regional Climate Center. And as Doug mentioned, we'll have an open time for questions at the end, and you can either, as he said, raise your hand or type those into the screen. So what are we going to be talking about today? So we've ended the winter season, so we'll give a recap of December, January, February conditions in terms of temperature and precipitation. We'll talk about February. There's kind of a lot to talk about there. We had some interesting extremes happen during the month. We'll look at how the first couple weeks of March is shaping up, cover some impacts from around the region, talk a little bit about El Nino. Obviously, we're in neutral conditions currently, and what do we think might happen in terms of El Nino and when that might materialize. We'll go into the climate outlooks, the most recent ones that were put out today, and then have time at the end for questions and comments. So if we want to recap the winter season here, so for the statewide average temperature rankings, that's what you see in the upper right, and in the lower left, you'll see the same kind of information, but it's in a climate division scale. So for the contiguous U.S. as a whole, the average winter temperature was continued warm. It was 6th warmest on record for the winter as a whole for the whole U.S. Although if you look at the map in the upper right, you'll see there was a cool pocket certainly in the Pacific Northwest where they did not feel the warmth. But for much of the rest of the country, we did experience a warmer than normal winter. If you look at the north central region in particular, portions to the if you hit a line kind of between through the Dakotas and into Nebraska and Kansas, to the east of that line, it was warmer than normal. But once you get in the Nebraska Panhandle and the western Dakotas and into Montana and Wyoming, that's where we were about normal for the winter in terms of temperature, or even below normal in portions of Wyoming and Montana. And if we look at precipitation in particular, so the contiguous U.S. as a whole had the 8th wettest precipitation total on record for the winter. The north central region, so the area that we're talking about today, saw wetness in the north and west, and in fact Wyoming had the wettest winter on record. But there was a definite dry pocket centered around Missouri and Illinois. So kind of wet in the north and west, and then drier as you went further south and east. So now we'll look at February in particular. So here I'm just showing the statewide average temperature rankings, and you'll notice quite a few states that are red and have the number 123, which means they were the record warmest February, going back to 1895. So for our region, Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Kentucky all had the warmest February on record. And a few other states in our region had the top 5 warmest on record. So Colorado, Kansas, Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, all of those were in the top 5 warmest. So really warmth all across our region, and most significantly in the east and southern areas. If we look at how that departed from normal, so here we're just zooming in kind of on the north central region. So this is for the month of February in particular. So the monthly temperature departures, some of the areas exceeded 10 degrees Fahrenheit for the month as a whole. So the strongest departures, as you can see from the map, were in southern Minnesota into Iowa, portions of Kansas, and quite a bit of Missouri, Illinois, Indiana, and into Ohio, and then actually pockets of Colorado as well. So the map that you see here, any of the areas in red were at least 6 degrees warmer than normal, or in the dark red are actually 10 degrees warmer than normal. So really widespread warmth throughout the region for the month of February. And if we look in particular at the middle to end of February, there was many daytime high temperatures records broken, as well as high nighttime low temperatures that were broken, records broken. So if we look just at the High Plains region in particular, and zoom in just on kind of that third week in February. So the graphic in your upper left is February 16th through the 22nd, so that week, and then the table below is showing you the new records that were set all across the region, from North Dakota and Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, and South Dakota. So many locations had high temperature records that were broken into the 70s, approaching 80 degrees, which is obviously quite warm for middle of February. And if we slide to the east and look at the Midwest region in particular, again, this shows you the magnitude and the spatial extent of this warm streak that we had. So there's a couple of different symbols here. The black squares are both daytime high and high maximum and high minimum temperatures that were broken. And this graphic here is actually showing for the month of February in particular, for the month as a whole, but actually the bulk of that extreme warmth was in the second half of the month. So the black is showing you both high maximum and minimum temperatures. The red triangle is a high maximum temperature broken, and then the pink triangle is a high minimum temperature broken. So again, just a very large area of this region. Virtually all the region was had many daily high and low temperature records broken. So one graphic that I've been, and probably other people have been following throughout the course of the last 6 weeks or so, is the progression of spring phenology. And what this is illustrating is a departure from normal. So how early are we seeing signs of spring in certain areas? And if you've been tracking this over time, you've been noticing it's obviously been trending northerly as we get further into the season, and it was particularly accelerated through the February warm period that we had. And we've actually been warm into March as well in the southern parts of the region. And so what this is showing you, that we're a few weeks early in terms of spring progression. So again, this is from the National Phenology Network, and it's updated every day, so it's something you can get online and track if you wish. So you might think, well, this year's we've been warm, and 2012 was also warm. So how do we compare this year to 2012? And actually, this year we're seeing the spring phenology, this change. It's actually coming earlier this year when compared to 2012. However, the bulk of the warmth in 2012 was actually in the month of March, and not as much in February. So I thought this was just an interesting comparison of 2012 to this year in 2017. So, speaking of spring phenology, one thing that we'll be keeping a watch on, or for you to keep a watch on, is when does the last freeze occur on average? And so this graphic is showing pretty much the entire north central region. It's by the Midwestern Regional Climate Center, so you can get online and track when the last freeze occurs. Now, again, this is on average. And obviously there's can be lots of variability from year to year. But since we're getting into middle of March, thought it would be interesting to illustrate that we're getting close to the time period where at least southern portions of the region we might be looking at perhaps approaching the average date of the last freeze in spring. So on the on the map you'll see the dots that are in yellow and brown color in the southern portions of the region. Those are into early to mid-April. And then once you get into the green colors, those are the last freeze typically occurs in May. So this is a graphic that we can be sure and show again at the next webinar a month from now on April 20th. All right, so we've talked about temperatures during February, so let's look at precipitation conditions. So it really varied across the north central U.S. depending on where you are. It was the top 5 wettest in Wyoming, for example. You can see they're much above average in that dark green color. However, if you went to the south and east and into Missouri and Illinois, those states experienced the top 10 driest on record, again going back to 1895. So you'll really see a mix of conditions where some areas were wet, some areas were dry, and some areas averaged out at about normal. So a really mix of conditions for this February for precipitation. If we look at in terms of percent of normal, again zooming in kind of on the north central region, you can see where the pockets of wetness occurred. So the areas that are kind of in the blue and purple color, those are 150 to 200% or more of normal. And a lot of this had to do with some heavy snow events that came through. And if for northern Nebraska, those areas got a foot or more of snowfall in a late February snowstorm and other areas of the region. But there were obviously some areas of notable dryness, so areas in Kansas, South Dakota to the north, and Kansas to the south, and eastern Colorado, and then obviously into Missouri and Illinois, northern Iowa. So these pockets of precipitation kind of occurred throughout the region. So again, it really depended on where you were and how much precip you got. So keeping with precipitation, or showing 2 different time periods here. So the graphic at the top half of the screen is showing a departure from normal precipitation, not a percent like I showed in the last one. So it's showing you how many inches of a departure from normal if we look at precipitation that we've received since the beginning of the year. So we're going January 1st to the 14th of this month, so just a couple days ago. And again, you'll see kind of a mixed bag throughout the north central region, areas of wetness and areas where we're a few inches above normal and areas where we're a few inches below normal. And so the areas that are most concerned in terms of dryness would be pockets of South Dakota and southern Nebraska into Kansas, eastern Colorado, and that area of drought that's kind of been coming into play here into Missouri and western Illinois. So again, on the top, we're looking at the most recent 2.5 months precipitation departures. And if we go back several months, so the information on the bottom half of the graphic is showing you precipitation departures since October 1. So it's kind of further illustrating the dryness pattern that we're seeing kind of in the southern and eastern portions of the region. And in this, it's showing more of a wetness to the north and then dryness to the south. And again, these are departures with a scale at the bottom. You can see, so the yellow colors are in the few inches range. And then once we get into the orange and red colors, then those are a more significant departure more than 3 inches or 6 inches and so forth. So I've heard some people talk about snow drought, and so the graphics here again from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. It's showing on the left, it's showing you the accumulated snowfall in terms of inches over the snow season. So we start that in going back to July 1 of last year and ending a couple of days ago. So we've got the total snowfall amounts on the left and then the percent of normal on the right. And you can see kind of a split personality, I guess, so far this winter, where we're above normal snowfall amounts kind of in the northern half of the region and then below normal for the southern half of the region. And for pockets of the region, we've seen less than 25% of normal, even 10% of normal. So not much snow for the southern portion. So if we zoom in just on the most recent few weeks, here we're looking at both temperature and precipitation. So on the top half of the slide, we're looking at a temperature departure from normal. And so anything in the green and blue and purple colors, it's been colder than normal. Again, this is only for the first half of March here. And areas, the southern half of the region, actually portions of Wyoming, Colorado, and then areas kind of from a line to the east. It's been warmer than normal thus far for March. But again, this cold pocket kind of extending in the northern portion of the region, and most significantly in northeastern Montana and western North Dakota and northern Minnesota. So that's how temperatures have fared thus far for March. And on the bottom half of the slide, you'll see a departure from normal precipitation. Now, obviously, this is a short time period. It's only looking at 2 weeks, and this is not a particularly wet time of year for this part of the country. It will be getting into the wetter time of year, further into spring and summer. But we've seen some pockets of precipitation thus far in the southern and eastern portions of the region. So I mentioned a little bit about kind of the warmth that we've seen, and we've had kind of a smattering of daily high and high daytime highs as well as high nighttime low temperatures that have been broken. This is not to the extent that the February kind of winter heat event was, but here we're looking at some high temperature daily temperature records that were broken thus far in the month of March. And these are available from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. I believe these are updated daily, so you can go to their website and if there's an extreme event and see how these record highs and lows are tracking. So obviously the U.S. Drought Monitor was released this morning, and these are, again, for conditions that are valid this past Tuesday, the March 14th. So for the region as a whole, so 73% is not in drought, but conversely 27% is in areas of D0 to D4. In comparison to last week, that's a little bit more than what was in D0 to D4 last week. We're degraded a bit, and particularly in Missouri and areas to the south. So the areas that we're concerned about and keeping an eye on obviously would be much of Missouri, western Illinois, southern Iowa, and eastern Kansas, as well as areas of western Kansas, southern Nebraska. We've seen some drought creeping in there, eastern Colorado, and then further north we've got the area of drought kind of centered in the Black Hills and areas north and a bit west into northeast Wyoming, and kind of creeping up into North Dakota, and a small pocket in western Montana. And if we look at how the drought conditions have changed over time. So this is kind of since the last webinar that we've had. So March 14th compared to February 14th. So you can see we've had some areas of improvement in the north, in South Dakota, and areas in the northern Nebraska Panhandle, eastern Montana, as well as portions of western Montana, a little bit in southern Colorado. We've seen some areas of improvement, a one-class improvement, one-class to two-class improvement for those areas. And then areas to our south, though, have not fared very well over the last month. We've seen a 1 to 2 class degradation in drought conditions in portions of Colorado and Kansas. A lot of Missouri has not fared very well. A little bit into Nebraska, some drought creeping in. Southern Iowa, and then into western Illinois, and a little bit into southern Kentucky as well. So we've seen some improvements in areas and then some degradations in other areas. If you look at soil water conditions, this is a graphic that's typically shown on these webinars. So this is a modeled product called NLDAS, and it's showing you the kind of the upper soil profile, what's the moisture anomaly, and this is it's on a metric scale, it's in terms of millimeters, but anything in the white category would be right about normal, and anything in the purple would be wetter than normal, and then in the yellows and red colors would be less than normal. So you can see pockets of wetness in our region for northern Iowa into Wisconsin and Minnesota. You can see wetness in the soil profile or anomalous compared to normal in portions of North Dakota and in eastern northeast North Dakota, which I'll point out later when we look at flood risk. Areas of western North Dakota and into areas of Wyoming and eastern Montana. So we're all experiencing some anomalous wetness in the soil profile. And then we do have kind of a smattering and some pockets of dryness in the soil profile. Eastern Colorado, eastern Wyoming, portions of North Dakota, South Dakota, and kind of creeping into southern Nebraska and throughout Kansas, and then this large area across Missouri into western Illinois, southern Iowa, and then areas further south. So snowpack, how is that faring? If we look, focus in on the Missouri River Basin and look at mountain water snowpack, and where there's quite a bit of information on these graphics, and we're looking at kind of two different areas here. So on the left, we're looking at the total above Fort Peck in terms of inches of water equivalent in the snowpack. And then Fort Peck to Garrison is on the right-hand side. So on each of these graphics, the blue is representing kind of that cumulative snowpack conditions over the course of this season, 2016 to 2017. The red line that you see there on both of those graphics is that most recent 30-year average, so 1981 to 2010. And you've got several lines that are colored lines that are illustrated here. So 1997, which was, and 2011, which were high snowpack years, that's in purple and dark blue respectively, and then 2001 in green, which is a low snowpack year. So you can see how this year has trended, and the total above Fort Peck is right about average, 104% of average currently, and this was as of March 13th. And if we go Fort Peck to Garrison, we're running above average. You can see some snow events that occurred in January and February that have kind of pushed the snow water equivalent totals up above normal. And so that's running about 130% of average in the Fort Peck to Garrison area. I did want to point out, I've got the some text at the bottom of the slide kind of circled in yellow. Just wanted to point out that normally by March 15th, about 87% of the peak mountain snow water equivalent has occurred in both reaches. So we're getting close to where that peak will occur. All right, we'll look at snow depth conditions. And these, I apologize, I forgot to put the URL here. This is a remotely sensed product by NOAA, as you can see here. And I can, if you want to know where to get this, you can contact myself or Doug or one of the organizers, and we can direct you to the website. What I'm showing you here is conditions, remotely sensed and modeled conditions as of this morning. This is a snow depth in terms of inches. You can also get snow water equivalent product from this website. And it's showing you quite a few areas that are free of snow, mostly in the western portion of the north central region, aside obviously from the higher elevation mountains in the Rockies in Wyoming and Colorado. But it is showing a relatively high snowpack in kind of north central North Dakota, and that's extended down into South Dakota and then kind of a swath through southern Minnesota and northern Iowa. But there's not much snow cover elsewhere, and even portions of Minnesota in the north are snow-free. Okay, so that was snow on the ground for more of the plains areas. So if we focus more on snow water equivalent and kind of what these mountain basins are holding, and you can see a lot of kind of aqua colors and blues and purples on this map, and even greens as well. So for a lot of these areas, they're running at normal or above normal. So that's the case kind of in the mountain areas that will drain, say, into the North Platte and South Platte rivers and impacting this region. And focusing in on Wyoming and Colorado, you'll see above normal for much of these areas, or even 200% of normal for areas into Wyoming. So we're running pretty well in terms of snowpack conditions in those basins. Currently,
Martha, just one comment on that snow water equivalent is that one comment we got out of Colorado, and I'm not sure this is necessarily the case in Wyoming or Montana, is that a lot of the lower elevation has melted off with the above normal temperatures that they've seen over the last few weeks. So, you know, I'm no expert on what lower elevation goes up to or mid elevation, but a lot of the lower elevations, and there's been some high runoff so far, but the upper level, higher elevation stuff is sticking in there pretty well. That's all. Sorry to bother.
That's all right. Yes, good point. And I'll mention that as well, kind of in the impact section. But yes, thank you for pointing that out. All right. So current stream flow conditions. So as a nationwide view, but if we just kind of focus in on some key areas of the north central region. So the areas with the kind of green dots are normal, and then in the blue kind of aqua and then bright blue colors would be above normal to much above normal, which you're seeing for portions of the region, say in Minnesota and Wisconsin and areas to the west. You see a few of the black dots there, which are high, highest in terms of the percentiles. But obviously, we're seeing very low flows in the areas where we've got the drought observed in portions of Missouri and areas in Illinois, as well as some areas in southern Nebraska and Kansas. We're seeing much below normal current stream flow condition in terms of a percentile. So this graphic came from a story that actually just came out this morning. It's a very long URL. It's listed below, but it's in a NOAA media release. And there's a story gives good information about this graphic and explains it in a little bit more detail. But I just wanted to highlight this area of concern in terms of the region that we're focusing on in this webinar. The area of greatest concern is in northern North Dakota. The Devil's Lake or Spirit Lake area is expected to have to be major flooding occurring in this area. The Souris and the Red River valleys as well, really looking out for those in terms of major to moderate flooding. And so a combination of the extensive snowpack that we have in this area, saturated soils that are still frozen at this time, and so the water that's sitting on top of the ground and the water that's in the ground, the combination of those, they're looking in terms of major to moderate flooding in this particular area. Only minor flooding in terms of a risk assessment for other portions of the region. So I'll get in now into some events and impacts. So I just kind of put a few topics here that I'll cover, and I appreciate all the input from the various states that have contributed. So I'll talk a little bit about the fires that have taken place, which is the images that you see here, and in particular the fire in Ashland that burned thousands of acres and lots of cattle losses and other damages. There's been a very interesting mix of conditions, particularly with the warm February, some severe weather that has occurred already, the winter heat wave, snow drought, and so forth. So I'll just go through some of the impacts that we've seen. And I did want to draw your attention to one product, operational product that is available through the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. So if you've not heard of this, it's something that you can look at to give you an objective indication of how severe a winter season was. So not a particular storm event, but the season as a whole. And this is a product called the Accumulated Winter Season Severity Index, and it was developed by Barbara Mays-Faustad out of the Omaha Valley National Weather Service office, and then Steve Hilberg from the Midwestern Regional Climate Center. And trying to get a good handle on how to describe a winter season in an objective way. So again, this takes into account both temperature and precipitation, and we have different categories for this OSSI, it's what it's called, from extreme in purple to mild in red. And you'll see we have a number of different kind of longer term observing stations represented here. And you'll see a lot of red dots on the map, and those are mild winters in terms of temperature and precipitation. And if it's a diamond shape, then it's actually record mildest, and that goes back to about roughly 50 years or so for those records. So in our region in particular, you see a lot of mild categorical winters, but you also see some moderate to even extreme winters, say in Bismarck, North Dakota. So it really depended on where you are in terms of the severity of the winter. Another kind of impact of the warmth that we've experienced is ice cover on the Great Lakes area. So if we turn our attention and focus on the Great Lakes, this is illustrating a total ice cover of about 20%, most of which is in Lake Michigan. For 4 of the lakes, the ice cover is below to well below average. Except for Lake Michigan, there's been kind of a surge and some establishment of ice cover just recently. In fact, it was running below average, and we've had some ice cover get established, and so that's getting back up to normal for this time of year. But for much of the lakes, we're well below average in terms of ice cover. All right, so kind of a state-by-state look at impacts, and we'll start out west. Wyoming, what we're hearing from them is some severe ice jams that have caused pretty significant flooding in the community of Worland in particular. And one thing we're hearing from them, this kind of dichotomy of wetness in the west and then warm and windy and dry conditions in the east. And if you've driven across Wyoming, particularly I-80, east-west route, and we've had a lot of winds that are either northerly or southerly winds, which is causing potential issues with transportation and ability to get across some of these east-west interstates with these really strong north-south winds. In Colorado, it's kind of the same story, this hot, dry, windy conditions in the east. We've seen some fire occurrence, and we've seen elevated fire danger in the east. And the next point there is something that Doug mentioned a few slides ago, snow-free at low elevations. But once you get higher up, those areas are holding on to snowpack without any significant melt thus far. So continuing on further east in Kansas, the most significant impact that we've seen there are the wildfires that occurred in early March. There were many, many acres that were burned, some lives lost, homes destroyed, and lots of cattle that have been lost. And again, the around the Ashland area, that's the main kind of area of concentration with these fires. And they occurred with some warm and dry and very, very windy conditions. I believe it was about the 6th or 7th of March when those flared up. In Nebraska, some reports that we're hearing is early calving with the warmth, and I believe that has taken place in South Dakota as well. We've seen some field work taking place, so some field activity with some spring anhydrous applications. And one thing that we're watching here in Nebraska is dry conditions potentially developing in kind of the southern portions of the region. We'll see if we get some moisture here in the next few weeks, but that'll be something to watch for Nebraska, is that dryness kind of creeping into the south. In South Dakota, we've had some potential winter wheat breaking dormancy early, and with that comes the need to scout for pests and disease. We've heard that major river flood risk is likely not a concern for this time of year. Ice out on lakes has been early, as well as in Minnesota, in fact, and potential for wildfire concerns. We've got a lack of snow cover in some portions. We've had warm conditions, and especially if it gets windy, then we'll have some elevated wildfire danger, perhaps. In North Dakota, the major story is the river flood risk in the Red River Valley and the Souris, and then the Spirit Lake area. So looking at moderate to significant flooding for portions of North Dakota. Going further east again, so in Illinois, I've heard reports of a lot of agricultural field work taking place. Given the mild winter that we had, that might increase potential for more pests. We've also heard reports of some lousy bird hunting, particularly for southern Illinois. The season in the south with not a lot of signs of any ducks and geese and things that people like to hunt. So heard reports of not a very good hunting season for southern Illinois. And drought areas to watch are in the far west. So that's something we'll be keeping an eye on. And what happens in terms of short and long-term precipitation conditions. From Ohio, we've seen some freeze warnings along the Ohio River, and obviously freeze warnings to areas further south that extended well into Florida, in fact. Lots of freeze and frost advisories there. We haven't seen any damage reports come in yet, so we're kind of in a wait-and-see mode currently. An interesting statistic from Iowa that we've received is the first reported February tornado on record, and have had 10 reported tornadoes for the season thus far. So a very early start to the convective season. In Minnesota, we've seen some record early ice out on some lakes, which have since refrozen. We had the warmth in February, and ice went out on some of the lakes, but we have seen a cool down for that area, and temperatures go below zero in portions of Minnesota. So some have since refrozen. Similarly with the frost, we've seen frost going out in Minnesota and then refreezing conditions. There we've also seen the earliest reported tornado in Minnesota. High flows for this time of year on the Mississippi with the thaw that we've seen. And then again, the Red River area that we have some flooding concerns. All right, so we'll get into the outlooks. We'll talk about short-term, kind of how the remainder of March looks. We'll look at river flood potential, El Nino, and will that materialize and come about? What are the chances for that? Look at a drought outlook, and then get into summer conditions. So the 7-day QPF, quantitative precipitation forecast. I grabbed this just this morning. So obviously there's a lot of greens and blues on this graphic. So chance possibly for some precipitation, and which could spell a very good thing in Missouri and Illinois and areas of northern Arkansas, areas that are kind of in the worst drought in our region at this point. We could see some relief here if some of this precipitation materializes, but looking for a kind of a wet signal here over the next 7 days. So here we have temperature and precipitation, the 6 to 10 day outlook, and this was made yesterday, so it's good for or valid for March 21st to 25th. And for the north central region, the increased chances for below normal temperature conditions for the north, kind of the north and west portion of the north central region, and then kind of a warm tongue extending up kind of southern Missouri, Kansas, into the Nebraska Panhandle, Colorado, and Wyoming, and up into Montana and Idaho. So we've got kind of tilting the odds toward cold in the northwest and warm in the southeastern portion of the region of interest. And if we switch to precipitation, we've got kind of a dry signal in the far northwest portion of the region, kind of northern Minnesota, Wisconsin, and the UP, Michigan, and so kind of dry signal to the north, and then there's kind of that wet signal for much of the central and southern portion of this north central region. If we go out a bit further, the 8 to 14 day outlook from March 23rd to 29th. So kind of a similar signal really here, that below normal tendency is kind of shifted a bit to the south and covering more of Iowa and getting a bit further into Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio, and covering all of Michigan, Wisconsin. And then again, that warm tongue is shifted a little bit further south, and then more significantly, well to our south, Texas, Louisiana, and other areas. And then, but there's still that snippet that's kind of extending in through Colorado, Wyoming, and then into Montana. And if we shift our attention to the precipitation graphic on the right, you'll see an increase for much of the country, increased chance for wetter than normal conditions. So El Nino, and what is that going to do? Well, it's a little bit difficult time of year to for these predictions, but so this graphic is from the Climate Prediction Center and the IRI out of Columbia. Their probability kind of distribution, and is going out in 3-month time periods. If we start on the left of the graphic, you'll see February, March, April, and then March, April, May, and then going out consecutive 3-month time periods here. So the neutral probability is in green, which is currently what we're in, neutral category. And so the probability of El Nino, you can see that kind of ramping up a bit. And so by the July, August, September, and then further out, the El Nino starts to be slightly favored in terms of probability, and the neutral probability continues to go down. And if you look at both the statistical and the dynamical models, they're both kind of keep trending toward the El Nino occurrence. So obviously this is something that we'll keep a close watch on as to how this progresses over time and how those probabilities trend over time. So the April outlook in particular, so these are the new outlooks that just came out today. And so the month of April looking like perhaps an increased chance for warmer than normal conditions for kind of the eastern half of the U.S. and the southern portions of the U.S. And they've got a bit of a wet signal for an increased chance for wetter than normal conditions, kind of in that central portion of the U.S. and the central portion of the north central region. And we can look at the April, May, June's time period, that seasonal, this next seasonal outlook. Starting to get some higher probabilities of above normal temperatures, particularly to our south, but that's kind of creeping up northward for that, those enhanced probabilities for warmth for that April, May, June time period. And again, that wet pocket. So the graphic on the right is looking at the precipitation probabilities. So that wet pocket kind of in the northern portion of this region we're starting to enhance that probability of an increased chance for wetter than normal conditions. So that's for April, May, June. And we can look at the drought outlook. This is kind of covering that same time period. So, well, middle of March to the end of June. So for the next 3-month time period, what is the drought outlook? And so for portions of South Dakota, portions of southern Nebraska, and a little bit into western Kansas and northeast Colorado, looking like drought removal is likely. We've got some kind of light brown shading in there, which is indicative of drought remaining, but improves in portions of our region in the southern areas. And if we look at Missouri in particular, it'd be nice if these outlook panned out, where we could possibly remove the drought conditions if the precipitation materializes for this area, looking at potential for improving the drought conditions in that area. But then eastern Colorado and extreme southwest Kansas, we're looking in that drought persists category. So this is drought conditions valid for the middle of March to the end of June. You can go a little bit into summertime conditions, June, July, August. And again, we're seeing kind of increased chance for warmer than normal conditions for southern and eastern portions of our region, and this equal chances bulge kind of moving into the north central portion of the U.S. And in terms of precipitation, it's still got kind of a wet pocket in the north central region, but then this probability of below normal, kind of shifting the odds toward possibly drier conditions for southeastern portions of our region, perhaps in the June, July, August period. And if we go out one more month, July, August, September, again, we're seeing the warmth build in this area and continuing kind of that wet pocket in the northwest and north central portion of this region. So again, these are outlooks for the July, August, September time period. So these will be things that we'll be, again, obviously tracking for the next monthly webinar, and seeing if perhaps the El Nino materializes and how these outlooks will be kind of influenced by that. So to sum up, so for the recent conditions, we've had record warmth over the past month, literally thousands of daily temperature records broken all throughout the region with this record warmth. We've yet to see significant vegetative impacts due to the freeze. They're not quite apparent yet. Hopefully we've escaped them in our region, but that'll be something that we can give an update on at the next monthly webinar. We've seen some fires in Kansas, Colorado, and South Dakota, so throughout the region, due to these warm and dry and very windy conditions that have kind of kicked up. So we've seen some significant fire activity and perhaps potential for fire activity into the future. Seen an early start to this severe weather season with tornadoes that have already been reported, and so it's been interesting seeing some convective cloud formation, I know here locally. We've seen an intensification of drought in across Missouri and western Illinois over the last month. However, contrasted with that, we've seen continued wetness in the north. In terms of the outlooks, so again, the greatest flood potential is for northeastern, north and central North Dakota and the Souris, the Red and Devil's Lake areas. If the upcoming over the next 2 weeks, if we do get some wetness, perhaps that will help with some of the precipitation deficits in the drought areas or those areas that are a bit drier, like areas into Kansas and southern Nebraska and other areas. El Nino chances increase over time, and El Nino is slightly favored by the end of the summer time frame. And the monthly and seasonal outlooks are showing a warmth for the southern eastern region and then kind of building northward over the course of the season. And we're seeing this pocket of wetness for the northwestern portion of this region. All right, so I'll list some web resources again. We've got the regional climate centers that are listed there. And again, you can get today's presentation here within the next few days. You can get past recorded presentations, all of them, going back to when these were first started in 2012, at those following websites. There's a lot of information available. NOAA's National Centers for Environmental Information, monthly climate reports on the State of the Climate website there at NOAA. You can visit the Climate Prediction Center for up-to-date outlooks, weather forecasts, and so forth. So a number of different web resources that are available to you. And I thank you very much for your time and for listening. There's a number of people that are listed here. So there's my information and a couple of folks that are listening in. And if there's time, I guess, Doug, if you want to moderate the questions.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Martha. We're going to run out of time here unless we go really fast. Sorry about that, everyone. So let me go through these questions. If you have any more, feel free to raise your hand or whatever. We'll try to deal with them as best we can. As far as the ice cover over the Great Lakes, comparison to normal over the other years, it's around 16 or 16%, 17%, and normally, if you look at the average from 1973 till now, it's about 33%. So it's about half of what it normally is. So that was that question for you, Benjamin. Wendy made a comment, Wendy Kelly from USDA made a comment that western Wyoming is experiencing significant snowmelt at lower elevations, less than 7,000 feet. So as Wyoming and Colorado for that matter. And then let's see. Yeah, the first question from Bryce Anderson was relating to the fires in Kansas and then in Oklahoma. Is it overstating to call this outbreak the result of a flash drought, especially considering that January had above, had above average precipitation? And there's a lot of different ways to go on that. It's difficult to get a flash drought. In my opinion, it's my opinion. During the winter, you can, I suppose, but since you don't have an incredible amount of evaporation, you may have a lot of wind, but you may not have a lot of evaporation. But what happens is whatever was growing there the last year has certainly dried up. If you don't have snow cover, sometimes it doesn't matter how wet the soil is underneath it, you can still have a lot of dry matter on top. And 50, 60-mile-an-hour winds, there's just no stopping that until green-up occurs a little later in the spring. So I think it was a culmination of early season temperatures being above normal for sure, drying things out, and lack of snow cover, which Martha reported on, and then and just incredible winds, which I won't say fueled the fire, but certainly helped it move in a very rapid pace. I'm not sure if that answers your question or not. Martha, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I mean, I would agree with what you said. I don't really have anything to add.
Okay. And then any drought concerns about this year compared to 2012? Benjamin Diamond's asking that question. you made a comparison in your presentation to 2012 in terms of where we were, I think in terms of phenology, and we were way ahead compared to 2012. But I think you also pointed out, Martha, that 2012 had a different time of much above normal temperatures. And I think we were seeing 80s for at least a week or two, maybe more than that, in mid to late March, which was never seen before. And we haven't seen that yet in March, thankfully. In fact, we had a nice cool down over the last few days across all of the region. So it really has put a kibosh on growing, and we don't know in terms of repercussions in the southern part of the basin on how much damage that has done. We'll see that later. Maybe some people know, but we don't have any indication of how damaging that was or could be to crops. Luckily, the warmth, I guess you could say, came a little earlier than it did in March, so things weren't trying as hard to bloom out and all that kind of thing. So maybe in April we'll have a better assessment of what kind of damage, if any, was done to places. Now, I do know, that said, I do know that places as far south as Florida had freeze warnings last night, so it's undoubtedly there will be some damage south of our region. Anything else you want to add to that, Martha?
Yeah, I guess just there was a significant drought going on to our south. In 2012, there was the drought that started the year before in the southern plains, and so that's something that we don't necessarily have this year.
Yeah. Okay, and then the next question was area in, okay, no, never mind. And then Jerry Oster from WNAX asks, any consensus if El Nino will reemerge? And I'll take this, and Martha can add on to it, but the trend has been for the last 2 or 3 months for El Nino to develop later this year. Okay, and I say the trend, and I really mean the trend in the models more than lots of other things, has been trending in that direction. It's unusual that we would flip back relatively quickly to El Nino. However, it has happened a time or two in the past. The models have been in more agreement as time has gone along. The problem with predicting El Nino, and we've fallen into this trap, or the models have fallen into this trap before, is that they're wrong. And they're wrong this time of year more often than most other times of year. And we in the business call it the spring barrier to our prediction. And March and April, actually February, March, April, maybe even into May, it's tough for the models to really know what's going on in terms of ENSO, or El Nino, La Nina. So I'd say hold on as best you can, and we're not calling for it now. Once the Climate Prediction Center is adequately happy or ready to say something, they'll call a El Nino watch. That'll be the first thing they say. It's like, okay, indications have been that it's El Nino-y enough, or the models look that way, and there's things happening in the ocean that cause us to believe that El Nino is much more likely than a month ago. And so they'll put a watch out. We won't be in an El Nino yet, but they'll certainly be sort of indicators, right? Then we'll go to an advisory later in the year as they get more convinced that an El Nino would occur. So that's as far as I'll go on the El Nino question. Any other questions or comments from the crowd? And I'm looking around for hands up or anything like that in case you have a question or comment. Anything you want to say? Oh, here's one. Chip Zimmer says freeze damage to winter wheat in Kentucky will be assessed next week. Yep. So it's really tough, I think, for folks at this early time to say how bad things are. It may even take into the growing season a little bit on some crops to know that. Anyway, thank you, everybody. Let's see if we have anybody else. Last chance. Our next presentation will be in April. I'm forgetting the date. What was the date?
April 20th.
April 20th, okay. And that'll be Dennis Toddy. Again, we all know and love Dennis from the Midwest Climate Ag Hub based in Ames, Iowa. Thank you very much, Martha, and thank you very much, everyone, for being on the call. And if you have any questions or comments, feel free to email or call me, or Martha, for that matter. Thanks, everyone.